Part 2. Black Maid greeted Korean Mafia boss's dad. Her Busan Dialect greeting had every guest frozen. 3 months. That's how long it takes to transform from invisible to indispensable. From a maid folding towels to an intelligence officer planning operations. From a woman with one purpose, revenge, to someone trying to build a future on the ashes of her past. They gave me an office on the 40th floor of Park Tower. Floor-to-ceiling windows, custom furniture, security clearance that makes seasoned enforcers nervous. All because I spoke Korean to an old man in a hotel corridor. All because I saved his life when bullets shattered glass and illusions of safety. If you were shocked by my true identity in Part 1, you won't believe what happens next. Like if you're excited to see how I navigate the dangerous world of the Korean Mafia. Comment your predictions about my relationship with Jung Ho. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength behind invisible faces. I still keep my apartment in Queens. The maps are still on the walls. The surveillance equipment still hums through the night. Old habits don't die because someone gives you a corner office and a new title. 10 years of looking over my shoulder can't be erased by 3 months of conditional acceptance. And it is conditional. Make no mistake. The park organization tolerates me because Old Man Park decreed it. Because Jung Ho supports it. Because I proved useful when Jin Woo tried to destroy them. But the old guard watches me with thinly veiled contempt. A black woman in their ranks. A foreigner with access to their secrets. An outsider wearing the name Park without sharing their blood. They whisper when I enter rooms. Switch from Korean to regional dialects they think I won't understand. Test my loyalty with small betrayals disguised as miscommunications. I pretend not to notice. I learned long ago that being underestimated is a tactical advantage. Last night, at a charity gala where the parks laundered influence alongside money, I wore Chanel and played translator for Jung Ho as he charmed politicians. 3 hours later, I was in Flushing, dressed in black, interrogating a smuggler who'd been skimming profits. The blood under my fingernails didn't quite match my nail polish. The duality would be amusing if it wasn't so exhausting. You move between worlds better than anyone I've ever seen, Jung Ho told me afterward, as his driver took us back to Manhattan. He meant it as a compliment. He doesn't understand that moving between worlds means belonging to none. Jin Woo sits in federal custody, but his network persists like cancer after the tumor's removal. His lieutenants operate from shadows, determined to finish what he started. They've already made one attempt on Jung Ho's life. A car bomb that would have succeeded if I hadn't recognized the pattern from an attack in Busan years ago. For seconds of warning. The difference between life and death. Now I lead the investigation to identify remaining traitors in our ranks. I say our like I've accepted my place here. Maybe I have. Maybe I'm tired of running. Maybe having a purpose beyond revenge feels like oxygen after a decade of holding my breath. My methods aren't traditional. I don't rely on loyalty tests or torture or threats to family members, the time-honored approaches of Korean organized crime. I follow money. I analyze patterns. I create digital tripwires that reveal betrayal before it materializes. The old guard hates it, calls it too American. They don't realize I learned these techniques tracking Jin Woo for 10 years without resources, without backup, without anyone believing in my existence, let alone my capabilities. Your father would be proud, Old Man Park told me yesterday, watching me compile data on suspected traitors. He uses that phrase deliberately, your father, reinforcing the legitimacy of my connection to Sangmin, to the Park family, to a heritage that shows on my face only when I speak. I dream of Busan more frequently now. The small apartment above the noodle shop. The careful way Sangmin taught me to observe people, to read intentions in body language, to move without being noticed. He never told me he was grooming me for the family business. He thought he was teaching survival. Maybe they're the same thing. In one recurring dream, I'm 8 years old again, standing on Busan's docks as rain soaks through my clothes. The American missionaries are walking away, their backs straight with righteous certainty as they abandon the black child they brought to Korea. A failed project, an embarrassment, a complication for their narrative of white saviorism. In the dream, I don't cry. I didn't cry then either. I had already learned that tears were useless currency. Sangmin finds me in the dream as he found me in life. huddled inside a shipping container, planning to stow away on a vessel heading anywhere else. But instead of taking me home as he did in reality, Dream Sangmin walks past, unseeing. I call out in Korean, perfect, fluent Korean, but he doesn't turn. I am invisible, unheard, abandoned twice in one day. I wake from these dreams drenched in sweat, heart hammering against my ribs. The jade pendant Sangmin's father gave me clutched so tightly in my fist that it leaves an imprint on my palm. The fear isn't of abandonment. It's of returning to invisibility, of losing the recognition I fought 10 years to achieve. Jung-ho sees me. That's the most dangerous thing about him. Not his power or his ruthlessness or the blood on his hands, but the way his eyes track my movements across rooms. The way he listens when I speak. The way he remembers details I mention once in passing. After a lifetime of being overlooked, being truly seen is more addictive than any drug. There's something growing between us. Unspoken, unacknowledged, unexpected. A recognition of kindred spirits, perhaps. We're both products of brutal education. Both carrying legacies we didn't choose. Both more comfortable with strategy than emotion. Yesterday, he touched my wrist to get my attention during a meeting. A casual contact that shouldn't register. But my skin burned where his fingers rested, and when I looked up, his eyes held a question neither of us is ready to answer. Old Man Park watches these interactions with knowing eyes. He's become a strange sort of father figure, not replacing Sangmin, but offering a connection to him, to the culture that shaped half my identity, to traditions I embraced then buried during years of anonymity in America. He teaches me things Sangmin didn't have time to share. The proper way to pour tea for elders. The significance of family ancestral rites. The nuances of respect language that even fluent Korean speakers often miss. These lessons happen in private, away from the judgmental eyes of others who see my lessons as presumption rather than birthright. You are Korean in your heart, the old man told me last week. More so than some born here who've forgotten the old ways. The validation shouldn't matter. I'm 27 years old. I've survived abandonment, fire, loss, and a decade of solitary purpose. I shouldn't need an old criminal's approval to validate my identity. Yet his words filled cracks I didn't know still existed in the foundation of who I am. 2 days ago, everything changed again. I was tracing financial connections to one of Jinwoo's shell companies, searching for his remaining allies, when I found something unexpected. A payment from the shell company to New Life Ministries, the same missionary organization that brought me to Korea as a child, then abandoned me when I became inconvenient. The payment was made 19 years ago, exactly when I arrived in Busan. Attached was a scan of a handwritten receipt for services rendered in securing the package. My blood turned to ice in my veins as I stared at the document. The implications crashed over me in waves of nausea. I wasn't abandoned by righteous missionaries. I was sold. A transaction. A package delivered to Jinwoo's organization nearly 2 decades ago. But why? What value could an 8-year-old black girl have to Korean organized crime? I found more documents, transfers to an orphanage in Atlanta that closed 15 years ago. Records of 3 other children who disappeared from foster care, all within months of each other, all with the same destination. South Korea. All approximately my age. When Jung-ho found me in the office at 3 a.m., surrounded by printouts and empty coffee cups, my hands were shaking with rage, with questions, with the shattering of the narrative I'd built my entire identity upon. "What is it?" he asked, concern edging his voice when he saw my face. I showed him the documents wordlessly, watched understanding dawn in his eyes as he connected dots I was still struggling to comprehend. "Jinwoo was trafficking children," he said finally, "and you were one of them." "But why?" My voice cracked on the question. "What possible use?" "Organ harvesting," Jung-ho interrupted, his expression grim. It was a rumor back then that Jinwoo had connections to black market transplant operations. Children from countries with poor record-keeping. Children no one would miss. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. Then why am I still alive? Why was I left at the docks instead of... I couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't vocalize the horror of what might have been my fate. Jung-ho's eyes softened with rare vulnerability. "Because Sangmin found you first," he said simply. He interrupted whatever was supposed to happen next. The realization hit me with physical force. Sang-min didn't randomly discover an abandoned child. He intercepted human cargo. Saved me from becoming spare parts for wealthy patients who wouldn't question the source of their second chance at life. Does this mean my parents didn't give me up? The question escaped before I could contain it. The desperate hope of a child who never stopped wondering why she wasn't wanted. Was I taken? Jung-ho hesitated before answering. It's possible. These operations typically targeted vulnerable children, orphanages, overwhelmed foster systems, impoverished areas where documentation was minimal. I need to know, I whispered. The mission crystallized with sudden clarity. Not just justice for Sang-min anymore, but truth about my own origins. About who I was before I became Park Min-ji. Before I became Vanessa Jenkins. Before I was forced to recreate myself in the image of survival. Shocking twist. Did my life begin with a kidnapping rather than abandonment? Like if this revelation left you speechless. Comment your theories about my real parents and whether I should pursue the truth. Subscribe now because the action is about to intensify as enemies close in from all sides. Jung-ho offered resources without hesitation, access to databases, investigators with experience tracing missing persons, DNA analysis that might find familial matches. His immediate support should have been comforting. Instead, it terrified me. What would I become if I discovered my entire foundation was built on lies? Who would I be if I found a family that had been searching for me all these years? What would remain of Park Min-ji if Vanessa Jenkins had a history beyond abandonment? I threw myself into work instead of dwelling on unanswerable questions. The Park organization was attempting to legitimize portions of their business empire, moving into real estate development, technology investment, legitimate shipping. I found myself in boardrooms with American executives who spoke to Jung-ho while ignoring me entirely, despite my position as head of strategic intelligence. Their dismissal became my advantage. Men who believe you're merely decorative speak freely in your presence. They reveal weaknesses, biases, ulterior motives. One executive from a major investment firm spent an entire meeting addressing his remarks to Jung-ho's chest while I recorded every word, analyzed every inflection, cataloged every lie. Afterward, I presented Jung-ho with a comprehensive breakdown of the man's true intentions. To acquire proprietary technology through the partnership, then force the parks out through regulatory complications. How do you do that? Jung-ho asked, genuine admiration in his voice as he reviewed my analysis. See through people so completely? When you're invisible long enough, you learn to see what others miss, I replied. It wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was darker. That Sang-min had trained me from childhood to read threats in micro-expressions, to hear deception in vocal patterns, to recognize the subtle tells of someone planning betrayal. That my survival had depended on these skills long before I used them in corporate boardrooms. I became our bridge between cultures, helping the parks navigate American business customs while educating our American partners on Korean expectations. My dual identity, once a source of perpetual alienation, became our competitive advantage. I existed in the hyphen between Korean-American, translating not just language but intent, context, implication. For 6 weeks, I felt almost settled, almost purposeful beyond revenge or survival, almost like I belonged somewhere, to someone, to something larger than my pain. Then came the betrayal from within. Park Sung-ho, old man Park's nephew, who had resented my position from the beginning, made his move with calculated precision. He planted financial irregularities under my access credentials. Created digital breadcrumbs suggesting I was funneling organization money to offshore accounts. Whispered to Old Man Park that perhaps his sentiment for Sang-min had clouded his judgment about the black woman who claimed connection to a dead man. I discovered the frame-up only hours before it would have been presented as evidence against me. By then, Sung-ho had already isolated me from my strongest allies, sending Jung-ho to Tokyo on urgent business, arranging for Old Man Park to visit his doctor for tests that would keep him unreachable for hours. I had a choice. Run again, start over somewhere new, abandon the identity I'd fought to reclaim, or stand and fight alone, with limited resources, against an enemy with home field advantage. Running was smarter. Fighting was necessary. For myself, for Sangmin's memory, for the truth about my past that remained tantalizingly out of reach. Instead of fleeing, I went to ground in my Queen's apartment. Activated emergency protocols I'd established during my years hunting Jinwoo. Called in favors from people who owed me. Not Park Min-ji, not the park's intelligence officer, but Vanessa Jenkins, the woman who had helped them when no one else would. The bartender who listened when they needed to be heard. The cleaner who found their lost wedding ring. The waitress who remembered their children's allergies without being told. My network wasn't powerful in traditional ways. No enforcers with guns. No politicians on payroll. But I had information specialists who could trace Sung-ho's digital footprints. Building security guards who could tell me his movements. Hotel staff who could access his meetings. Within 18 hours, I had compiled irrefutable evidence that Sung-ho wasn't just framing me. He was working with Jinwoo's network, positioning himself to take control of the park organization once I was discredited and Jung-ho was undermined. When Jung-ho returned from Tokyo to find me gone and accusations against me circulating, he didn't believe them. Not for a second. That trust, immediate, unquestioning, absolute, hit me harder than any betrayal could. In a lifetime of being doubted, dismissed, and discarded, his faith was revolutionary. He found me in Queens, arriving alone despite the risk, concern etched in features usually schooled to impassivity. When I showed him the evidence against Sung-ho, anger transformed his face into something dangerous, something predatory. He will pay for this, Jung-ho promised, the softness of his voice inversely proportional to the violence it promised. Not yet, I countered. We need him to lead us to the others, to Jinwoo's remaining network. Jung-ho studied me with that penetrating gaze that always made me feel transparent. Always the strategist, he said finally. Even when it's personal. Especially when it's personal, I corrected. Emotion is a luxury I've never been able to afford. Something in my voice must have betrayed the cost of that statement. The years of suppressed rage, grief, loneliness. Jung-ho moved closer, hesitating before lightly touching my face with calloused fingers. What if you could? He asked quietly. Afford emotion. Afford connection. Afford to be something beyond a weapon or a tool or a survivor. The question undid me more effectively than any torture. Tears I denied for a decade threatened to surface. I stepped back, away from his touch, away from the dangerous possibility he represented. We have work to do, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Sung-ho is meeting his contact tonight. If we move now, we can identify the rest of Jinwoo's lieutenants. Jung-ho allowed the deflection, respecting boundaries I'd built for survival. But his eyes promised this conversation wasn't over. Just postponed until survival wasn't our most pressing concern. We tracked Sung-ho to a private club in Koreatown. Watched as he met with 3 men Jung-ho identified as former associates of Jinwoo. Recorded their conversation with directional microphones as they discussed their next move. A plan so audacious it seemed impossible. They were going to break Jinwoo out during his upcoming prison transfer. The federal marshals responsible for the transfer had been compromised. The route had been leaked. A tactical team was in place. Once freed, Jinwoo would reclaim leadership of his organization and eliminate the parks once and for all. Starting with Old Man Park, then Jung-ho saving me for last as an example of what happened to those who betrayed him. We had 48 hours to prevent a prison break, identify corrupt federal officials, neutralize a tactical team of unknown size, and expose Sung-ho's betrayal without destroying the Park family's reputation. Impossible odds, Jung-ho observed as we returned to his secure office to plan our countermove. I prefer to think of them as appropriate odds, I replied. Anything easier wouldn't be worthy of us. His smile, rare and transformative, flashed briefly. Us, he repeated, as if the word itself was significant. Perhaps it was. The next 2 days blurred into a continuous operation, identifying the compromised marshals, replacing them with our own people, changing the transfer route without alerting those who expected the original path. All while maintaining the illusion that Sung-ho's plot against me had succeeded, that I remained isolated and disgraced, that the park organization was vulnerable to attack. When the day of the transfer arrived, I took position on a rooftop overlooking the new route, rifle assembled with the precision Sangmin had drilled into me since I was old enough to hold one. Jung-ho coordinated from the ground, directing our forces with the calm authority that had made him his father's successor despite older, more traditional candidates. The attack came exactly as planned, but against the decoy transport following the original route. For 15 minutes, we watched through surveillance feeds as Jinwoo's forces engaged with empty vehicles and undercover agents. Then came the realization that they'd been duped, followed by frantic regrouping. Sung-ho, panicking as the operation collapsed, made a fatal error. He called the secondary team directly, revealing his involvement completely. We traced the call, identifying 3 more conspirators within the park organization and 2 federal agents on Jinwoo's payroll. The real prison transport, meanwhile, continued unimpeded to its destination. A higher security facility where Jinwoo would have fewer opportunities for external contact, fewer chances to rebuild his network from behind bars. We should have anticipated that Sung-ho, cornered and desperate, would lash out with the viciousness of a trapped animal. Should have protected Old Man Park more carefully. Should have remembered that betrayal from family cuts deeper than any enemy's blade. Sung-ho reached his uncle before we could warn the old man. Found him alone in his study, vulnerable despite the security outside his door. Drew a gun with the intention of eliminating the head of the family, creating chaos that might still allow him to escape the consequences of his actions. What he didn't anticipate was Old Man Park's lifetime of survival instincts. Despite his age and fragility, the park patriarch disarmed his nephew with a single movement, a technique taught to Korean special forces by American instructors during a war most had forgotten. The gun discharged during the struggle, not finding its intended target in the old man's heart, but burying itself in his shoulder nonetheless. The gunshot brought security rushing in. Sung-ho was subdued, the old man rushed to private medical treatment, and a family crisis contained before it could become public knowledge. But the damage was done. Blood had been spilled by blood. The ultimate taboo in Korean family structures had been broken. I reached the hospital as surgeons worked to remove the bullet from Old Man Park's shoulder. Found Jung-ho in the private waiting room, his composed exterior masking the rage I could feel radiating from him like heat from banked coals. "He will die for this," Jung-ho stated when I entered. No greeting, no preamble, just cold certainty. "Not by your hand," I countered, taking the seat beside him. "You can't be the one to kill your cousin, no matter what he's done. The blowback would destabilize everything." Jung-ho's jaw tightened. "You suggest I let this pass? Let him live after he tried to kill my father? After he betrayed our family to Jinwoo? I suggest you let justice happen in a way that doesn't stain your hands with family blood," I clarified. "There are other approaches, cleaner ones." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You would do this? Take this burden?" "It's not a burden," I said truthfully. Sung-ho was willing to frame me, to destroy everything I've built, to erase Park Min-ji all over again. His death would not weigh on my conscience. Jung-ho studied me for a long moment before nodding once, decision made. No further discussion was needed. Arrangements would be made. Sung-ho would have an accident in custody. His betrayal would be hidden from the wider organization, attributed to outside forces. The Park family would maintain face, avoid internal division, prevent rivals from exploiting perceived weakness. 2 days later, as Old Man Park recovered under private medical care, I received the results of the DNA analysis Jung-ho had ordered. My genetic material compared against databases of missing persons, unsolved cases, familial searching. A match had been found. 98% certainty. April Jenkins. Reported missing from a playground in Atlanta, Georgia, 19 years ago. Age 8. Presumed dead after extensive searching found no trace. Parents still living in the same house, holding annual remembrance ceremonies on her birthday. Mother a nurse. Father a high school teacher. 2 younger siblings born after her disappearance. Their parents attempt to heal wounds that never fully closed. I stared at their photos, these strangers who shared my blood, my original name, my beginning. The mother whose eyes matched mine. The father whose smile I recognized from rare glimpses in mirrors. The siblings who had grown up with a ghost shadowing their existence. They had never stopped looking, never stopped hoping, never accepted that their daughter was gone forever. For 19 years, they had maintained a website, followed leads, connected with families of other missing children. They had kept April Jenkins alive in their hearts while Vanessa Jenkins, my invented identity, moved through the world like a ghost. Jung-ho found me sitting in the dark, the file open before me, tears falling unchecked for the first time since the night I escaped the fire that claimed my Korean family. "I don't know who I am anymore," I whispered as he knelt beside my chair. "Park Min-ji, Vanessa Jenkins, April Jenkins, daughter of Sang-min, daughter of strangers who never stopped searching. Korean in my heart, American by birth. I'm fractured into pieces that don't fit together." "Then don't force them to fit," Jung-ho said gently, taking my hands in his. "Be all of them, every piece, every contradiction, every complexity." "How?" The question contained all my fear, all my confusion, all my desperate need for solid ground beneath feet that had been running for so long. "By accepting that identity isn't singular, it's accumulative," he replied. "You aren't Korean or American. You're Korean and American. You aren't Sangmin's daughter or the Jenkins' daughter. You're both. You haven't lost anything by discovering your origins. You've only gained context." His understanding, so complete, so accepting of my complexity, broke something open inside me. Not the controlled release of pressure I'd allowed myself in rare moments of vulnerability, but a complete collapse of the walls I built to contain my pain, my rage, my grief, my loneliness. I wept for the child taken from a playground, for the parents who searched empty streets calling a name I'd forgotten was mine, for the Korean family who died in flames because they protected me, for the decades spent pursuing vengeance instead of connection, for all the versions of myself lost to necessity and circumstance. Jung-ho held me through the storm, solid as bedrock, asking nothing, offering everything through his presence alone. When I finally quieted, exhausted by emotion too long contained, he helped me to the couch in my office, covered me with his jacket, and sat beside me until sleep claimed me. I dreamed of Busan again, but this time Sang-min found me in the shipping container, took my small hand in his calloused one, led me not to his home as he had in reality, but to an airport where my birth parents waited, arms outstretched, tears streaming down faces tight with worry and hope. "She belongs with them," Dream Sang-min said in Korean. "But she will always carry a piece of our country in her heart." I woke with clarity I hadn't felt in years. The path forward wasn't choosing between identities or loyalties or families. It was integrating all the fragments into something stronger than its individual components. Something unique, something whole. When I told Jung-ho my decision to contact my birth family while maintaining my position in the park organization, he supported me without reservation. When I explained my plan to Old Man Park, still recovering from his wound, the elderly man nodded with understanding that transcended cultural differences. "Family is not blood alone," he said, echoing wisdom Sang-min had shared with me years ago. "It is choice, commitment, shared purpose. You honor both your families by embracing them equally." The park organization evolved in the months that followed. My influence, American directness tempered by Korean respect for tradition, shaped approaches to both legitimate and shadow operations. We expanded technological capabilities, improved security protocols, developed intelligence networks that relied less on fear and more on mutual benefit. Jung-ho and I moved beyond professional partnership into something neither of us had anticipated finding: connection that honored strength rather than demanding weakness, respect that recognized darkness without requiring its dominance, understanding that saw complexity as valuable rather than problematic. The first time he kissed me was after a particularly challenging negotiation with Japanese counterparts, a moment of shared triumph that transformed into something electric, inevitable, necessary. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, just recognition that this had been building since I tackled his father to safety as bullets shattered hotel windows. 3 months later, Old Man Park hosted a private ceremony at his estate outside Seoul. Not a wedding, we weren't ready for that level of formality, but a declaration of intent, of commitment, of chosen family. Before the organization's most trusted members, I was formally acknowledged as Park Sang-min's daughter, and heir to his position within the family structure. I wore traditional Korean formal wear, a modernized hanbok in deep blue silk, but kept my hair in Bantu knots, a deliberate honoring of both heritages. Jung-ho stood beside me, his presence an anchor as always, his pride evident in the rare softness of his expression. Afterward, I visited Sangmin's memorial alone, kneeling before his photograph as incense curled toward the ceiling. In Busan dialect, the language of his heart, of my second birth, I told him about finding my American family, about building connection with the parents who had searched for me through years of emptiness, about siblings who welcomed the sister they had known only through stories and fading photographs. I told him about maintaining my position with the Parks while establishing relationships with the Jenkins family, about the complexity of belonging to two worlds, two families, two traditions, about finding strength in integration rather than separation. You saved me twice, I whispered to his image. First from the docks, then from Jean Wu's organization. Without you, I would not have survived to find my way back to my first family. Without your training, I could not protect my chosen family. You are the bridge between my worlds, and I honor that connection with every breath. As I lit the final stick of incense, my phone vibrated with an incoming message. Unknown number. No identifying information.